1979 movie Yanks, directed by John Schlesinger. I'll start with this quote. Love is something far more than desire for sexual intercourse. It's the principal means of escape from the loneliness which afflicts most men and women throughout the greater part of their lives. That was said by the famous philosopher Bertrand Russell, where in in England in 1943, thousands of American troops are in Yorkshire for manoeuvres before the Normandy invasion in the Second World War. They're far away from home for the first time in their lives, and this film directed by Schlesinger, we follow the paths of three Americans as they try and cope with their loneliness, and they gravitate towards, of course, the young, attractive British girls. We have Chuck Vennerell, who's desperate for some bit of sex, and he falls in love with a cute bus conductor played by Annie Ross. Matt, his buddy, played by Richard Gere, is a sergeant from Arizona, and he meets Jean, played by Lisa Einhorn. She's a shopkeeper's daughter whose fiancé is fighting for the British, and their commander is John, played by William Devane, and he forms a friendship with Helen, played by Vanessa Redgrave. And she's a rich matron whose husband is off at war. And that's the backdrop then to this movie. Three relationships, three love affairs, and we'll follow their paths. And any other notable performances? It's a melodrama, touching scenes. The only real dramatic incident is the outbreak of racial violence at a New Year's Eve party when a black soldier crosses the colour line and dances with an English girl. Schlesinger's storyline is engaging. The pace is quite leisurely, and it has a nostalgic tone. So there we are, that's the backdrop. Now we'll get on to the movie. Continuing my look at Yanks, it's very impressive really from the first frame. It's winter 1943 in England, pretty bleak. A number of American soldiers, troops arrive in Yorkshire just preceding the Normandy invasion, and they're a long way from home, first time in their lives, and they come across the locals, of course, and this is captured immediately where children in their sort of terraced houses, one boy spots the Americans arriving in their wagons and points out to his mother, who comes down, and they've got rather differing views of this arrival from these strangers. The boy really likes them. His mother is, I wouldn't say not keen, but it's a little bit more reserved. And then we move to the wagon and meet Chuck, Matt, and they're having a chat, or Chuck is anyway, about the possibility of getting some nookie, and the dialogue between Chuck Vennerell and Richard Gere is absolutely typical of young single men, even back in the mid-40s, who's sort of to a large extent can get preoccupied with getting their leg over, but Schlesinger captures the mood immediately, and it lays the groundwork for what is to be an opportunity to sit and watch war in the comfort of your armchair. But it's not. It's not all a happy-go-lucky experience.
I'm going to focus on scenes really, which give out messages to the viewers. This movie is much more than just entertainment involving three romances. A great scene at the breakfast table when Jean's father comes in. He's working two jobs to make ends meet. The family are relatively poor, and his wife, played by Rachel Roberts, sort of exchanges conversation with him about him overdoing it, doing two jobs, and getting him settled down so she can provide the breakfast, very much capturing the role of a wife at that time period, not just because it's wartime, but because that was how things happened. Women didn't work. They were very much looking after the family and the staying at home, making sure that the house was tidy, etc. And then, of course, Jean's the daughter, and then her younger brother comes in with a cap, which he's sort of scrounged, as put it, by his mother, and his mother gives him a little bit of a telling off about appropriate behaviour at the table. Take your hat off, and of course the meal table was very much a place where manners were upheld. It was very much a case of a certain set of behaviours was unacceptable, and I like that. And reference, of course, is made to the Americans, and the mother, played by Roberts, is clearly irritated that these young Americans should come over and appear to be well off and able to give things away, and she's very much there's not envy really, it's more not outrage either, but nevertheless irritated at the divide between what she has to cope with in life and what they have. Her husband points out that these guys are miles away from home, and perhaps we should be a little bit more tolerant and accepting, and understand that they are perhaps frightened, perhaps, but definitely lonely, and we should see them as allies, friends, and give them some genuine sort of feeling of being welcomed. Great scene, and of course the sets perfect for this era, and I imagine my parents at this time, or not in so much as being identical to this family at this particular time, but certainly this moral code of what is acceptable behaviour and what isn't. And even though we might be poor and working class, we have certain standards. Lovely. We're then on the bus, and a very poignant moment where Gere's character is sitting on the bus. They're going into town for some R&R, and on the bus is this elderly man, and Gere smiles at him, and the camera moves down to near his belt on his trousers, and it appears to be some sort of star or in signature. I suspect that the elderly man is a Jew, and that Gere is a Jew, and there's a sort of a recognition, really, of one of the vital parts of the world is to rid oneself of anti-Semitism, which has been leaking out of the press, the news, with regard to the Holocaust that's taking place in Germany and many parts of Europe, including Poland. I'm not quite sure about this insignia, but it's not a Star of David, but it's definitely it's on the belt of this man in the bust, and he's quite elderly, and I think it throws up these issues. Such a good script. As we get off the bus, the bus conductress who'd had sort of a friendly dialogue with Gere and Chuck Revel on the bus, and as the boys walk off to head into town, the girl invites the guy who's dying for sex back, and she gives him a piece of paper, which, when they look at it as they walk on, they see that there's a message that says that she's going to the movies, which is a sort of subtle hint that it'd be nice to meet up. And it's really a beautiful way of setting up a date. Absolutely wonderful. And inevitably, Chick and Matt find seats behind Jean and Molly, and there's a lovely little conversation. But at the same time, Pathé News, movie news, the war news is being shown to the audience, and it's pretty graphic. Schlesinger has it sort of held back with images in Southeast Asia, in Burma, of the efforts by the Allies, mainly the British, in trying to clear Burma of the Japanese occupation. We see pictures of real footage of Japanese dead. So you really know that you're in a war environment, and the realism in this movie is so on point. It's one of the best war movies about the Second World War, which looks at how the public were handling it. Most war movies focus on those embroiled in the battle and how their lives unfold, and they're valid and certainly necessary. But this also takes a long look at how those sitting at home trying to help the war effort and to cope with the emotional aspect of being under attack, being alone, being away from their loved ones, and it's a striking tale, really, a striking picture of how the arrival of these American troops was almost a breath of fresh air to the British public, who had resisted and overcome Hitler's attempt to invade with the Battle of Britain. And now we're doing as much as they can to help the war effort as their troops and their allied troops were getting ready for the invasion to mainland France, the Normandy invasion. It's got all the points ticked on the history map, and I'm loving every minute of it. Just a moment to reflect on the acting ability of Richard Gere. This is a very young Richard Gere in 1979. He was about 25 years of age, about the same age as me, and there's this scene outside the cinema where predictably the British would head for the fish and chip shop, and the American good boys are with the girls, and there's a scene where the fish and chips pass back to Jean by Molly, and she decides, as she would do with her own, to get the salt cellar, add the salt to the fish and chips, and she does exactly the same with Matt's portion, and assumes that he is going to want the salt as well. And there's an amazing scene where Gere's eyes sort of watch what's happening, and his non-verbal cues, non-verbal communication with the smile and the sort of total acceptance of what's going on shows it just in that moment how brilliant his acting is. You know, acting isn't always about talking, it's about listening, and it's about reacting in a non-verbal way to communicate. And it's a sort of a passive sort of that's fine, that's okay, you know, don't worry, but I'm very interested in you, but thank you for the salt on my chips. Lovely. When I said when I was looking at scenes, I didn't expect to be looking at almost every scene, but following their first sort of date, the next day Mac enters the shop that Jean and her family run, and Jean, of course, hasn't told her mother that she went out with a Yank, and he comes in, basically tried to recover what happened when they said goodnight the night before, when he made a disastrous error in describing her as a foreigner in her own country. There's this sort of, again, this sort of scenario where he is presenting himself as a polite soldier, and he just wants to look around the shop, but basically he wants to get an opportunity maybe to have a word with her, or to try to get a second date, and she's being a little elusive, doesn't know how his visit's going to unfold, and the older woman in the shop, of course, who's beyond those years where she can catch a man, is very impressed with the young American's politeness and is all smiles to him. It's a lovely little scene about the differences between the two cultures, but at the same time what joins them together, what their common language, their sort of willingness and desire to establish some sort of friendship. So much in this film. So we moved to Helen, played by the absolutely gorgeous Vanessa Redgrave. When it comes to acting prowess, she is right up there. and she's typically a sort of upper middle class woman, well educated. She lives in a house that's, to say the least, elegant, and her attachment to the officer, played by William Devine, is starting to develop. He goes to the her residence, and there's this lovely little dialogue between them as Helen is doing a bit of gardening, and Devine basically describes a series of jobs that he's previously had back in the States, which would suggest that he's pretty working class, but he's managed to attain officer status in the in the U.S. Army, and so clearly is looking for a relationship that fits with his sort of status, and Helen fits the bill perfectly. It'll be interesting to see how this unfolds. Helen's disturbed by her sort of her paid help or housekeeper, and speaks to her young son who's at a boarding school. So we get some picture of wealth that's available in this household. But seeing Vanessa Redgrave is an experience that all movie fans should see. Wonderful actress. Relationship between Redgrave and Devine. They sit down and share some feelings about absent family members, absent partners. Devine has just received a letter from his wife, and she's basically sold the house in America and moved in with her parents. He brings up the notion that why did she let him know, but the important part is the fact that leaving his home to come overseas in a war situation brings up the possibility that he'll never come back. But conversely, Redgrave, whose husband is also overseas in the, I think he's in the RAF, she points out that her husband and herself's view of this absence was more positive, was that it's just a period away and that he will be coming back. But it's interesting how this notion of being away in a war setting could provoke these feelings of whether that relationship will end due to the absence turning to one of mortality. And it's really quite poignant about how those that are left behind would feel about their absent husbands. And of course, this feeling is likely to provoke the idea that to be loyal, to be morally against the idea of a relationship, that's belief system shifts somewhat, because one's fearful that come the future they may become, in her case, a widow, and in Divine's wife's case back in America, a widow as well. So some emotional sort of aspects to this film that need observations. Jean goes to the cinema to meet Matt, and as she waits outside, two other American soldiers who are starting to live it up with some booze spot her and want to acquaint themselves, and they get rather pushy. Jean is basically saying she's waiting for somebody, and then all of a sudden Matt arrives, and he uses his muscle and protectiveness to get rid of the two guys. But it's a tremendously powerful little scene, really, where he shows to Jean how much he cares about her, and how much he can't stand this behaviour by his own, who consider, you know, a night out on the town as an opportunity to get blazing drunk and behave totally inappropriately with the locals. And it rings quite a few bells with me here in Thailand. How I find the feeling very similar when I witness drunken Brits in the resort of Pattaya, who consider that they're at home and can do whatever they like, even though they're guests in this country. And it draws out this point quite vividly. In terms of the romance, of course, or potential romance, this will certainly shift Jean's view of Matt, and that's exactly what the script is attempting to do. Again, Gere a little bit over the top, but once again, his acting skills coming to the forefront. This is a real sort of picture about real experiences, not a fantasy at all. Matt and Jean's relationship is growing, but there's still a respect to the moral fibre, the morality that exists at this time. But when it becomes clear that Jean's mother is aware that she has started seeing Matt, she takes on a different stance. She's very much the fact that Jean is almost committing an adultery, even though her husband is overseas. And she views Jean's flirtation, as she sees it, as really quite unacceptable. Jean starts to defend her situation and describes Matt as a very respectable, a polite American who really is nice to be with. And she puts it into context with her when she says to her mother, "He hasn't put a hand on me in 3 weeks," which really sums up, I guess, the situation at that time, where morals were respected, and not by all, but were seen as vitally important, and the idea of sex outside marriage was frowned upon by the public, particularly in Britain. And I can, from experience, say
that this continued to exist really right up until the mid-60s. I hear, when I see this, a conversation involving my mother and my older sister, who experienced this sort of attitude from her mother, just as Jean is experiencing from her mother, with regard to going out with men or young men, and how they're only after one thing. Quite amazing. Great little scene where Helen, who's a volunteer nurse, is in a ward, and there's an American who's in the hospital, and he's damaged his leg in some way, and there's this beautiful little conversation where he's wanting to convey to his girlfriend or wife, I'm not quite sure, but I think girlfriend, by letter about his injuries, and is deeply concerned that she to convey to his girlfriend that he's still going to be able to have sex, and Helen takes it in her stride. She's obviously quite liberal, well educated, and free of some of the more archaic sort of morals that we see in Jean's house. And the contrast is, once again, brings a smile as you watch it. A lovely moment. Of course, Schlesinger uses the screenplay to sort of touch bases on other issues, albeit briefly. Helen's son Tim at the boarding school writes a tearful letter to his mother, explaining that he's been subject to bullying in the boarding school environment, a very common occurrence, of course, for a young boy who's perhaps a little timid, a little reserved, and not as masculine as the general run-of-the-mill at these boarding schools. And it brings a tear to Helen's eyes. And so, once again, we have an amalgam of emotions being experienced through Helen, helping in the war effort, anxious perhaps in part about her husband overseas fighting, and her son in an environment that was suitable because of the need to continue with education for her son, but that it really brings a new set of problems. And then she's got, of course, Divine, who she's starting to develop a friendship with. So it's a real sort of hotbed of confusion, really, for her and for all these characters. Matt arrives at Jean's house for tea. It's a little bit treacly, this scene, but Matt's come with gifts for the brother, the father and the mother, whiskey for the father, of course. But when Rachel Roberts opens her gift, it's a lovely cake with thanks written in the middle of it. And Matt tells her that he actually made the cake, and she's very impressed. But she then puts it back in the box and basically says, we'll save it for another day. And there's a slight hint of disappointment in Matt's face, but he's definitely moved forward in the estimation of the family for his generosity and good feeling. Schlesinger really wants to pinpoint the slight difference in cultures between the Brits and the Yanks, and this is seen very explicitly when they have their meal. The boy Jeff is brought up to use both knife and fork to eat his food, whereas Matt uses just the fork to cut his food and waves his cutlery around. It's sort of a minor point, but it does hint at a different sort of upbringing, and I think this sort of point may well have been overlooked by lots of viewers, and I've read a couple of reviews that were very damning about this movie. I just don't get it. The review suggesting that it should have been more scenes involving war. Well, it's not about that. It's about how ordinary people adapt to war conditions, and how these two unified forces, the American troops and the British people supporting the wearer of it, how they joined together to make life as pleasant as possible, given the fact that ahead was this dramatic war theatre of the Normandy invasion, just staring in front of the soldiers and, to an extent, the families, as they were in a state of slight anxiety as to who would survive and who wouldn't. The movie then moves on to look at the issue of violence, and there's a boxing tournament between the Brits from the RAF and the American troops, and the crowd. We witness the nationalism poking through as each side screams for their man to win the fight. And boxing, of course, is a pretty brutal sport anyway, one that I wouldn't I used to enjoy, but now I'm appalled by it, really, as a means of entertainment. It's very sort of indicative of how our species becomes almost inert and thrives on witnessing blood and sport together, and seems to get a certain kick out of violence. And of course, we're about to go into the war effort with regard to the invasion, and this would be the ultimate in terms of seeing how humans destroy other humans. We're the only species on the planet that do this, other than to survive by killing for food. We kill for politics, for fun, for all those things that, well, quite grotesque, the human capacity to embrace violence. And this is captured a little early on in this movie by this boxing tournament. Jean's boyfriend stroke fiance, or call it what you will call it, comes home, and this throws a spanner in the works for Matt, who really struggles because he now is acutely aware that uh, his relationship with Jean is second class, so to speak, from where he's sitting. And we witnessed the scene with Ken at the family home, and a speech by the father, Jean's father, suggesting that they, as a couple, were the future. It's all part and parcel of how emotions were a roller coaster of highs and lows in this situation.
Ken is about to return to the front, so to speak, and he's at the station about to say goodbye to Jean, and he starts talking about the future. He says that his father has promised him his business when he comes back, a garage, and this could be a future for the two of them. The problem is that Ken wasn't around when Matt described his future, which was a much more attractive sort of look at life. Building a motel, running a motel, and then getting a chain of motels to generate wealth way beyond the imagination of Ken in the UK. So Jean's now faced with this dilemma, really, of her possible future. She could go with Matt, who she's recently met and become quite fond of, or she can remain with Ken, assuming that they both survive the war, and settle down to a hard graft existence in the UK. Life and how you make decisions that will affect your future, or don't make decisions, ignore opportunities. That's what Schlesinger's trying to bring to this palette, and it's really rings so many bells in everyone's lives, really. But it's now a dilemma for Jean.
And what does Jean dream of? We move on to New Year's Eve, 1943, and we hear the New Year chant at the dance as everyone's happy and dancing away. And of course, Jean is there with Matt, and the bus conductor is also there with her American friend, and we are able to view what it was like to bring the new year in just prior to that Normandy invasion. Amongst the crowd, of course, as is the case, there was a contingent of American servicemen who were African American, and this, as I've read, was leads to yet more violence against African Americans by British. Those British who are unfortunately a reek of prejudice, and where have they got all that from? Well, of course, they are a colonial country, and that's how they managed to garner that prejudice, because they considered minorities, yeah, that's for you, as less British than themselves, and those with a black colour to their skin were put in that bag, so to speak. And so the influx of all these African American
men who appear to have a sort of status and wealth and all the other trappings that the Americans bring to the table, acted as a sort of ignition point, and so this happy occasion
was ruined by macho violence, as is the case so often in this world. Please note to delete this and the one before. So it's New Year's Eve, 1943, a big dance, everybody's having fun. We get the countdown, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 1. Happy New Year. Lots of affectionate hugs and kisses from the men, both English and American, with the young girls from the UK. And Matt's there with Ellen, and the score, and a great musical score. We hear predictably the music from that era with that sort of swing jazz sort of feel to it, and the black African American troops in the audience who are generally sort of ugly form. They're both there in the UK. They're both going to war. They're both going to fight against the right-wing fascists. But on an emotional level, individually, the prejudice is there to be seen. And this scenes of violence between Americans of different colour brings out, again, a very strong sort of message about different cultures. Although Gere's character, Matt, clearly was uncomfortable seeing the violence, he actually acknowledged that the black guy brought it on himself by dancing so provocatively with the young British girl, and this doesn't go down at all well with Jean and Molly, and they basically turn their backs on the two Americans and head across and invite black guys in uniform to dance with them, which they do. They're somewhat surprised, but they do. And the expression on the faces of Matt and Chick sums it up. They have learnt a lesson here about what it's like to experience that sort of feeling of being victimised because of one's colour. They're now being ostracised because of their inherent racist thoughts. This is what happens when you live in a society where it becomes the norm. You learn to accept it as almost inevitable, and it breeds within your psyche a feeling that, well, they are different, aren't they? As preparation is near now for the invasion into Normandy, we get a sort of a phase within the movie which is rather sort of slow and ponderous, and then it's back to the future thoughts of Ellen and Matt about life in Arizona. Ellen, of course, is concerned about her mother's health, and then they arrive back at the house, and Ellen's father tells her and Matt that her fiance Ken has been killed in action. The scene with Mother and Father Gene and Matt captures the pain really of relationships, of how they're formed, how they end, how we try and wrestle with our prejudices, our expectations, and our disappointments. We hear from Gene's mother and father who feel that Matt has somehow interfered with what has taken place. Ellen is seen as having now got what she wanted. Feelings expressed that are totally beyond what's real, what's factual. But life must go on. And for Gene, she now has a choice. Can she choose a future with Matt, or has she got to experience, for her mother and father's sake, a period of grief? She probably has a mixture of grief for Ken and intentioned life, desire for life with Matt. And so to the conclusion then. So how did those three relationships end? What happened? Well, I'm not going to tell you. You need to watch the movie yourself to see how the three couples took their last steps before the three men crossed the water to fight the enemy. There's a lot that happens, a lot of emotional entanglement that happens in the three of them, and it's a fitting sort of end really to this movie, and for me the movie represented a significant event because of my upbringing. My own mother and father were married on the eve of the outbreak of war against Germany announced by the British government. My mother was very young and my father was in his early 30s, and 33 to be precise, and so they took that plunge before he left. He was in the RAF and went to North Africa, but whilst away my mother was one of those young British women who fell for a young American serviceman, while my father was stationed in North Africa. And so this movie has a particularly poignant sort of impact on me, because I'm sort of, when I watch it, I'm sort of trying to work out who my mother was of the three, in terms of personality, and who my father might have been, who the American might have been, who was involved with my mother. Was he like Chick? Was he like John? Or was he like Matt? My mother was nothing like the three women in this film, it has to be said. but she clearly had the same desire at this particular moment in time. So, in conclusion, I have to say that this movie it had a tremendously emotional impact on me, and I watched it many years ago, but I didn't really grasp the nettle of what it meant to be in the armed forces and the consequences for the families in World War II. And I've now got a much more heightened perception of my mother's experience, clearly, and perhaps the American man, could have been my father. So that's my take on this movie, Yanks, 1979, directed by John Schlesinger, starring Richard Gere and William Devine. And get to watch it.